Welcome to VRChit Chat. It's time for our weekly tech talk where Mebot Exchange co-founder Peter Kirwan and I speak with a guest about a current topic. This week's guest is Robert Wyman Jr., a technologist, VR consultant, and VRChat enthusiast. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about this article that Peter found in the Wall Street Journal called "Critics Think the Metaverse Looks Bad. What do brands pouring money into it say?" And I actually really like this article because it touches on something that I've been talking about and thinking about for a while now, since the inception of kind of like quote unquote the metaverse. Because there's this promise of what it's gonna be. All you hear all the time is this is what it's gonna be. And then you know what the reality is now is mostly not, will not deliver on that promise. And I think that's, so people who first run up into whether they get like an Oculus or something like that, I feel like they get very disappointed very quickly because it doesn't live up to the hype. And it's very frustrating for people like us who've been playing around in these spaces for a while now, because anybody who's a huge skeptic, I say, like, just put on a headset, plug it into a computer still, though, unfortunately, and go into VRChat and explore some of the worlds there, and it'll blow your mind. Or play Half-Life Alyx, or just have an experience in VR to see how far it has come. And then you can see why people get excited about this space. But if your first, experience is going and playing like Roblox or going into Decentraland, I can completely understand the skepticism. Who here has actually played like Decentraland? Virtually raise your hand.
Only for a second.
Oh, like watching me play it.
Yeah.
Bob, have you played it?
I have not. No.
Okay.
You're not missing anything.
No, and that's the thing is, in so much of what people, when Zuckerberg posted his image, and this is all the article essentially talks about Zuckerberg posting that image of like, we're going to do the metaverse in Spain or whatever it was, or France, and people were joking that it looked like straight out of N64 or something, like something from the 90s, like they did it better. And they're not wrong, because if you look at what's coming out of Horizon, and if you ever played Horizon or jumped on Horizon Workspaces, have you done that one?
I haven't.
Okay.
Yeah. The thing about the Zuckerberg thing is, I think because he looks like an avatar in real life, that just like got so much press. I don't think any other person would have gotten that. And plus, people
but it's
don't like
negative
him, so.
press. Yeah, I mean,
It's
I love to
negative.
hate on him too, but
I know. But
it's not the complete experience of what like this metaverse is, because it's
I
so,
feel they captured him perfectly.
well, they did. Well, they captured him and his efforts perfectly. And I think that's what all this blowback is.
Yeah.
He is truly one of the worst spokespersons we could have for the type of, of reality we're trying to create, right? Or virtual reality we're trying to create. Because it seems like, right now, and it's interesting because the thing that this article talks about that I really like, though, is this idea that companies aren't dumping lots of money into this like idea of the metaverse, where there's Web 3.0, blockchain, crypto, NFTs, and also, some of these spaces, these, metaverse spaces, they're spending money. And I mean, the fact that and it's not like it was a blip on the radar and it went away, even though NFTs just got their butts kicked, and crypto kind of is getting blasted now in the news. They're still investing. And the question I always had was like, why? I'm glad they are, because somebody needs to be spending the money. And that's what this article really gets into, though, is that these brands do not seem deterred. So this was a question I brought up with Peter, and off this podcast, we talked about it. And Peter, you said something that I thought was really insightful. You were like, they missed, a lot of these companies were too timid when the original web came out, Web 1.0. They didn't understand it. They didn't see it as a threat or an opportunity. So they kind of just ignored it or half-assed it. And they lost so much money and market share because they weren't aggressively pursuing this new technology. And that's what I think is happening now, is they learn their lessons to say, like, better to like, and I'd be curious to see what the actual like marketing spend is compared to like traditional media and Web 3.0 and Metaverse, because I can guarantee you it's probably tiny. but they're there and they're trying to put their, make their mark on it. And I think that's something that's kind of missed in this whole article, is this idea that like, yeah, they're not going to be left out of these opportunities anymore. They know if something's emerging, it's better to be early and be first than it is to like be chasing after, the tastemakers. Anyway, that was my thoughts on that article, the good and the bad of it. And Bob,
Yeah.
you had something interesting you said right before we started recording, and I'd love you to kind of talk about that as well. You said it's comparing it to Web 1.0.
Right. Well, back in the day of Web 1.0, a lot of the people who are into the metaverse now don't remember that, but it was pretty ugly. It was pretty basic. And a lot of people looked at it and said, this is kind of a fad. This is horrible. It doesn't look good. We're not going to put anything into this. This is just, it'll be gone tomorrow. But it wasn't. It's around today. And it is so much more polished because it takes time to go from the initial stages of something to the point in which we're Web 3.0, and it's gorgeous. I mean, you go look at a website, and compared to what it was in the 90s, it's a completely different experience. And that's exactly what Web 4.0 is going to be. We can't have the expectations that it's going to be completely beautiful, photorealistic, and polished from day one. There's going to be that stage where people are experimenting with it. As they start to realize what it's going to be used for, it's going to evolve into something amazing. But that doesn't happen overnight. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of effort. And I think that people just need to lower their expectations. I know we're used to getting like the best things right away, but it's not always that way.
Yeah, I think that the other thing about that Zuckerberg thing was everybody's commenting on a photograph. I mean, not a photograph, a screenshot, two-dimensional screenshot posted. So how many of the people writing these articles and everybody jumping on it have actually experienced in 3D any of this, like with a VR headset? That's the thing that I think there's just this divide right now where 99.9% of the world has not put on a VR headset, and everybody's talking about it, or they've seen it, they put on a VR headset for 5 minutes, and they don't really understand the impact this has. Even that avatar of Zuckerberg, as bad as it is, in a three-dimensional world where you're talking and you have the presence, it's very different. And I think people, they don't really understand. I can just remember back in the 90s, the things people would say, like they didn't really understand where it was going to go. So they would, and also you would see these strange things with interface. People would do strange things, like magazines would be on a web page and you would turn the page,
because
like
they were still trying to make it what it was, not what it should be. Yeah.
And I think that's a lot of what's happening. If you look at what's happening with VRChat and some of these avatars and clothing that are some of these are garbage, but there's pieces coming out that are works of art that are really amazing. And yeah, okay, today they require a computer to be hooked up to the headset. So that's, of the small percentage of people that have headsets, the number of people that hook it up to computers is even tinier.
Yeah, with a good gaming computer, because you need a really fast computer to be able to even like appreciate it and use it properly.
Yeah.
And that's
that experience is breathtaking in some cases. I literally was in a scene, with that house that we were looking at, with the farmhouse, and the light and the dusk, the shadows, and the truck that was there was so real that I looked at it and I was like, I really couldn't tell that it wasn't real. Now I didn't have my glasses on, but
I you're really selling it, Peter.
Yeah, the metaverse is great if you just don't put your glasses on. So that's my advice. But I think that we're just dealing with a lot of people talking about stuff that have not experienced it, and there's this huge divide between what you can do with the most powerful graphic cards that you can buy versus what a person can put in a headset today, and that is obviously going to change. So I think I think there's also the thing about all the money that's going into the metaverse from brands. I think they're afraid to miss out. There's a FUD factor. There's like, what if we don't do this? Are we something really bad going to happen? Are we going to lose out? I do think some of them are smart in that they say, look, we're experimenting. We know we're experimenting, and they're doing stupid things, but they know they're kind of stupid. They're like, let's build a I'm sure that JP Morgan didn't think that opening up a branch in Decentraland or wherever they opened it was actually going to get them any new business, but it got them a press release. But I think it's also you start to experiment. So there's a lot of that going on. But in terms of the appearance, I do think, most artists that are going to create the next great thing, the medium, have never put on a headset. I mean, here when we want to talk about the look of something, I mean, you can have a Picasso that's a very wild painting, but you can also have a Picasso that's just a black and white sketch, and also just as beautiful. So I don't actually think it's a technology limitation. I think it's that the artists haven't put the headsets on, and they haven't actually understood the medium yet to actually create something great.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that I would say that this article is kind of poking around the edges on is, so this Web 1.0, it didn't become great overnight. And what it was is you had so many people across the world experimenting on their own time, because it was like an open source, right? Everybody could get on it and play. And then it developed over time. And I think that's what we're going to see. And the more that we can support and create that, where it's like the things that are the problems being solved are networked, into all these different diverse communities with people trying to problem solve and create, is going to get us there quicker, but also be more interesting than what we're seeing is the top down, which is, the walled gardens, these companies with billions of dollars spending billions of dollars. And I think that's what's actually kind of shocking to people and should be very obvious, is like, one of the examples you used, Peter, was people used to have to type in, wasn't it? Like before you had a web browser, you had to literally type in where to go, right?
Yeah.
On the,
yeah.
like, I never was on the internet at that point, but think about it, like those kind of solutions have to be come up with. And if you have one company's R&D division is never going to come up with it fast enough or good enough. And so like, that's where I think Zuckerberg is in a fatal place. And honestly, I don't know why they released that. Like, think about how Apple would have handled this thing. Like, they never release things that are underbaked, right? Like half baked.
Yeah.
So why did they release that? Like, the fact that Zuckerberg has nobody keeping him in check is probably the reason why, like, he's putting these things out that are just getting them slammed left, right, and center. And it's like, it would almost be better for them to hold the cards closer to their chest with what they're working on and developing. But at the same time, like, yeah, I'm not rooting for any single company to be like, create the best experience, because I really want to see it bottom up, come from the community out there who's going to help kind of design and build these things. I just think it'll be more interesting. And I think it'll be a better product in the end of the day that gets us there. One of the things I wanted to add. What? No, what?
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go, because I'm going to go to a different tangent. I want to make sure we.
All right, Bob, you haven't used Horizons, right?
I've not used Horizons.
Yeah, so Horizon is like, I imagine if you could look at the Facebook logo, the blue and the white, very simple. If you could go inside of that logo, that's what you're going into. It's a world that is the most bland place. First of all, nobody has legs. So, I mean, that's
it's
just
worse than that, Peter.
It's not comfortable.
It's not just going inside it; it'd be trapped inside of it. Because
like
one of the things
inside.
that's the most frustrating is you have no agency inside of it. So like, one of the things, the first thing you should learn about VR, that like when we were taking notes and Peter and I first were starting this company up, we're like, what do people do when they first get a VR headset on? They want to explore it like it's the real world. They want to touch things and move around. Horizon workspaces, you have to stay behind a desk, or if you want to go somewhere else, like to a blackboard, you have to like touch a button and then appear there. Like, so it's not a real physical environment. It's, a virtual environment. You're essentially locked into these little boxes.
Yeah.
I'm like, who designed this? There's nothing intuitive about it.
Well, I mean, I can give them a little bit of a pass on the fact that, people do sit around a conference room tape, but when you go to the actual Horizon worlds, the actual consumer just go walk around and go to different worlds. It's just, it's so bland. It's just something about it. They've just taken out all the fun out of it. I don't know, like, Bob, you've used VRChat quite a bit. And to me, the thing about like Facebook, Zuckerberg, his social skills are so lacking that it's not an accident that he came up with a programmatic way to deal with socialization in a program, right? So he's created the system for billions of people to use that is very structured, and and that worked, and it's huge. In this world, he's trying to do the same thing. He's trying to reduce it to the lowest common denominator. If MySpace was chaos, Facebook was order. He's trying to do the same thing. But the problem is, when you're in a world, like you might want your desk to be orderly, or you might want to get your letters from friends and have them stacked up, your email organized, but you don't want your world that you're in to be organized like to that extent. And whereas I think that VRChat is like this chaos, which is an expression. The worlds are an expression. I think the thing that and I don't think it's just Facebook, I think a lot of people are missing, is that the avatars, it's not just the clothes they wear. It's the avatar itself can be an expression of who you are. Not that it looks like you, but if it doesn't look like you. And I don't know, what do you think about, Bob? I mean, in terms of like VRChat, in terms of what people find interesting about it?
Well, first, I just want to go back and say that it, to me, is terrifying thinking of Facebook coming up with a user interface that's going to be even mildly successful in VR, because they haven't been able to achieve that on their website after all these years. But anyway, I think that VRChat is all about expression. Like everyone that I hang out with, they're just totally expressing themselves in every way, shape, and form. Their avatars, their house, everything. It's just, this is how they're expressing themselves. The things that are important to them, whether they're being like a different species or they're being an anime character, those are things that they're passionate about. So I think VRChat is a very passionate community. And then you, of course, get a bunch of 6-year-olds running around screaming on top of that. But I think that being able to express yourself is totally kind of what Web 4 encompasses, because you look at all of the iterations of the web prior to that, there's not a real personal presence for most people. You have your user account on a website, but really, what is it circling around? It's circling around that website, that company, that store front, or, it's not really your own expression. It's hard to make a website that people go to, because there's all kinds of money involved with a professional website to get through SEO and stuff like that, to get people to go to your website. The average person doesn't have the time to do that. So they don't really have a good place to express themselves. They require a third party, like I'm going to go on social media and do it. But in VR, you can have your body look exactly like you want it to be. You can have a custom avatar. You can even have voice filters and stuff like that. Maybe all of the things that you feel are lacking in reality, you can adjust and make them feel more like the way that you wish reality was. And that's the great thing about virtual reality. I don't expect it to look beautiful from a screenshot. And that is, based on that article, kind of the thing that irritates me, because VR sucks when you're just looking at a screenshot, because VR is not about a still image. It's about being able to interact and stuff like that. So you can have something that looks really horrible in a screenshot. My VRChat screenshots look like crap, to be quite honest. But when you're in VR and you're in that experience and you're interacting with people and you're able to move from side to side and see the perspective change and all of that is the magic that is VR. And you really can't portray that in a picture. So I think, even though I think that Facebook doesn't always do things great as far as like interface is concerned, I think that people are being unfair, because you really have to be in the experience to judge it.
Definitely. And I'm gonna jump off that as well and say that one of the things that is, again, if you haven't used it, you won't understand, is being in whether it's VRChat or Neo's VR, any of them, when you have a conversation with somebody and they have face tracking and full body tracking. So I only have just the regular headset with the paddles and hand tracking, so it's not very sophisticated. But once I started exploring and interviewing people and talking to people in these spaces, I was like, damn, that is such a different experience to be in a virtual environment. And then you're seeing the eyes blink and the expressions and the head move and the hands move. It does feel like you're in a space with another person, or at least another being. And you will never be able to, even a video of that doesn't capture what it's like to be with a headset on. And so a still
Yeah.
image of that is just completely missing the mark, right? I mean, until we can be able to capture super high renders of, like that is almost looks like a photograph, it is never going to even get close to that anyway. So
Yeah.
yeah, I do think a lot of this is just based off of sheer ignorance of what's happening in the space, and it's nobody's fault, because accessing the technology and be able to experience it and use it, it's still a very small subset of all of us. So, and I forget about that though on a day-to-day basis, because we're doing this every day. And so when I talk to
Yeah.
friends or relatives, the funny thing is the only thing you can do is show them the headset. Like that's what I do, is I plug it in, have them try it out. My biggest frustration with VR at this point is how, again, it's where I'm like, where's Apple? Like, where's somebody who understands, something that should be intuitive? Because so much of when I try to, for example, I had my nieces and nephew over last week, and they love playing VR. I give them credit. They're always like, where's the VR headset? So I give it to them, and they smash into things and, play. They love playing Beat Saber or whatever. I try to get them to try different games. They don't care. But that's the thing, is like, I have to always be there to help them because they can't figure things out. Like they're not sure why things
Yeah.
aren't working. I give them the tutorial. They still don't understand why it's working. I'm like, if you can't get a young child who's like, you give them literally like a laptop and they will, or an iPad, within 10 minutes, they're like buying stuff from, on a credit card, right? Like they figure it out so quickly. So what is the holdup with VR that it's just not intuitive yet? And I think, we're making progress. If you look at the hand tracking and eye tracking stuff they're getting down is leaps and bounds. But as Bob
Yeah.
said at the beginning, like, we're just kind of starting out, man. This is still not even
Yeah.
like the web 1.0 for VR. So I think that's where a lot of the disconnect is.
I think where
Yeah.
Apple is they, Apple likes to keep things under wraps until it's developed to the point where they feel that it's not going to be confusing and hard to use to the user. Right now, all of the stuff that we interact with, whether that VRChat, etc., kind of look at that as being the Web 4.0 laboratory right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a lot of unpolished stuff, and that's why Apple's not in the game yet. It's too early. They need to get a polished product together. So unfortunately for us, we're going to have to wait for that, I suspect. But that's usually how it rolls with them.
And it's funny because the timeline keeps getting pushed
I think
back.
Yeah, I think the thing with Apple is they wait till the experience can be so simple, and I think they're smart about what I think about when the Mac came out and how simple it was. You had folders, you had a garbage can. There were things that you could relate from your existing world into this world, and it didn't really do much. It didn't do multitasking, but the world, we forget that the whole world gets trained on these different iterations. It wasn't like they came out with this new one and suddenly it was so much better that everybody could use it. No, it's actually more complicated. Computers are so much more complicated to learn than they were back in the 80s. It's just that people have kind of grown along with it. And then younger people, of course, will adapt to anything. So that doesn't matter. So I suspect what Apple's going to do is not have some features just to make it super simple. And then they can add things in as people become more familiar with it. But I agree with what you said, Lucas. You can't just give the headset to someone and go, here, check it out. They have no idea what they're doing. There's no context. It's not like anything else they've done. And the problem with VR, and I suspect we're going to see a lot of starts and stops, but that's why I think Apple is so critical to making this happen, is that people have to try it. And they just think it's weird right now. There's a population, I would say the majority of people think this is my life, that's VR. My life and VR have nothing to do with each other. There's nothing in my life where my work doesn't make me use VR. My doctor doesn't make me use VR. My taxes don't require VR.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't have to use VR. And then somebody's telling me this amazing thing, but I'm like, well, I can't even relate to it. You put it on, and unless you put it on for a while and interact with other people, I think that's the other thing is I think Zuckerberg is, I give him credit for really seeing something that is not actually obvious, which is that VR is the ultimate social application. Mm-hmm. I don't think he gets enough credit for actually going and just being, that's it. That's like that's going to be bigger than anything. And he's totally right. And I think if Apple screws up, it'll be because they don't understand that. And Apple often
They don't
has not
understand the
understood
social.
that.
Yeah.
They
I mean,
don't
and
get
they don't
social.
never seem invested in social. It's never been their
No.
focus at all. Right?
And so that's, but I think other apps can deal with that. But I do think, because unless, like, you're looking at the 2D picture, it doesn't tell you, it's all about presence and the fact that you have a social space, and that when somebody stands too next to you, you feel it. You feel them being too close. And I always say with a Zoom call, no matter how close you put your face to the screen, you never think they're in the room with you. Whereas in VR, you'd be like, okay, I know I'm talking to an animated, hippopotamus, but I feel like it's right there, and they're a little bit too close.
Yeah.
And that's actually, so I think it'll be interesting to see when they introduce the Quest Pro in a few weeks. I guess it'll ship in October. They'll announce it maybe in September. And although it does the face tracking and the eye tracking, it still doesn't solve the problem that people don't understand why you'd even need that. Like most people, like we understand how big that is. That's huge.
I love that you
But
bring up social, Peter, because I do think that is what's confusing to me with Facebook strategy or Meta strategy, whatever, is like they seem to be splitting it between like enterprise and work. That a lot of the stuff they're developing and putting effort into seems to be like this work environment. And at this point, I don't see any way that VR makes work more like easier, enjoyable. Whereas when it comes to socializing and gaming, like those are things that, like, for me, VR is irreplaceable. I'm like, I'd much rather be.
Yeah,
I just don't see I just don't see it happening right now.
Well,
I'm not saying that's not where it's going to go.
I think the question is Meta going to be able to get to the business market? And I would say they've got no standing in the business market, whereas Apple does. Although even Apple, it's a little bit of a stretch. But I think the face tracking and eye tracking, if you there's this burnout from Zoom that is intense, like because you have to sit there and look at all these faces. You got to keep looking at them all. You can't look them in the eye. You got to go back and forth. And that is like the most fundamental. If you ever stare at a dog and you just don't move your eyes away, they get very upset. People instinctively, either if you're not looking at them, they think you're not listening to them. If you're staring at them the wrong way, that's not good either. So this is one of the most fundamental instinctive things we have, and you can't do it with Zoom. So if they can do that with face tracking and eye tracking, I think that's actually a really killer remote work application. So I actually think, people might not spend the money, but companies could be like, all right, well, let's buy these for a bunch of our workers, have these meetings with remote workers, and it could actually make a difference. The other thing is, I do think the first iteration will be these screens, these virtual screens that you can have, these big desktops. I actually think this is a kind of a classic. Well, let's take the old way to do it and bolt it into this new way. Whereas what Apple's going to do, it looks like, is they're going to make the applications float and be like not screens. They'll just be in three-dimensional space. This is what my guess is they're going to do. And that's going to be a potentially big productivity and creativity thing that you just can't do today. You just can't do it on a screen. You can't move things around. You have a limited space.
Well, Horizon Workrooms, the thing that I think was the most aggravating for me is that I'm supposed to be potentially using my
what
real world.
What do you think about
computer.
Horizon Workrooms?
Oh God. I mean, granted, I tried the beta version, I tried the early version of it, but it was just so against everything that is comfortable with like work is like, you just need to get things accomplished. So if you have these barriers in between it, it's not like you get to explore and have fun. Granted, that's what I can do with VR is play games and have fun. But with work, you just need to get things done. So as long as it's efficient, I'd be willing to be in Mark Zuckerberg's, bland world, as long as I could get my work done. You know what I mean? So he's not wrong about that. Like, there's no reason to make it look amazing if you just need to have a meeting and type on a computer. But like the fact that my real world computer shows up in VR, but then it's like, I have to link them. So I have to like sync them together. So I'm getting like a even though it's in the same room as me physically, when it's in VR, it's like not really there. It was just such a complicated way. And I was like, why are you trying to, like you were saying, Peter, why are you trying to recreate the real world in VR? Like, just make it easy in here. And that was the thing, is it should be intuitive and easy to work in there. And I think that's my big thing about it, is like, I agree that for meetings and for being in a room with somebody, it could be a big game changer, but they just got to find a way to make it simple. And like, that's one of the things that I liked about Spatial. It was a weird platform, but I did actually like it for meetings. I felt like you could have a few people in a room, even if their avatars weren't great. Remember, we did an early version, Peter, and we looked like creepy doll versions of ourselves. But we were able to have like a whiteboard, put some things on there. You can bring in notes. You could even connect your Google Drive and like bring in images and things, and have a web browser open. So it was basic, simple things, but that's all you really need. Like, they're trying to get way too complicated with the Horizons Workroom thing for me, where it's like, it's too rigid, and it should just have basic things to play with and then have your meeting. And that's kind of like where it needs to be. Granted, that's why I do think right now for work, I don't really see myself doing a lot of work in VR. But if with some slight tweaking and for the right reasons, whether it's listen, we're a small company, so we're not ever going to need to, at this point, to do like meetings of 30 people and like have us all show up. And but I could totally see that being a benefit. If you're a multinational corporation, you're in Japan, you're in, Idaho, where I am, and you're in, the UK, and you all can be in a room together and like, actually have a conversation that you need to have for your company. Like, that to me is worth, like, instead of a plane ticket and hotels, like that's a no-brainer, man. That's huge. That's like a game changer when it comes to some of this stuff.
Yeah. What do you think, Bob, in terms of like, if Apple comes out with something and the graphics are really amazing, what do you think that does to Quest, even though the prices are going to be like $2,000 to $3,000 versus $400? But what do you think? Does it affect people's perception of Quest?
I think that you're going to get a class divide. You're going to get people who could really only afford the Quest. They're going to be on the Quest, and they're going to hate the Apple product because it's so expensive. It happens every time an Apple product comes out. I see it. People are just like, well, that's so expensive. And then they look for reasons to hate on it just because it's expensive. So I think that will be a problem. But one thing that I've experienced with my Quest in giving it to people to use who had never used VR before, the first problem that they have, it isn't even once they're in VR, it's before they even get in VR. It's so hard to get a crisp image, to align the optics. If you have glasses, it sucks to wear. So all of those are important things that I think Apple will pay attention to. They may have like an automatic diopter adjustment. It's looking at your eye. It's like, oh, okay, well, now it's going to be crisp. You don't have to do anything, because that's the biggest thing. There's a lot of prep to be able to get the image to look right. Like for me with my Quest 2 and my glasses, I have to get it in the right spot, crank it down, and then if it moves like a centimeter, everything gets blurry and looks like crap.
Yeah, like that's a good point. And I wouldn't be surprised if Apple were to do a deal with Warby Parker or somebody to be like making the insert glasses and selling them at the Apple store, where you like, what's your prescription? Boom, and because I want to do that, but I keep forgetting the name of the company that does it. So then I forget to order. I never get around to ordering them. There's some thing you have to go through. It's a hassle, but I need those.
It makes sense. So when you place your order for your headset, they're like, what is your prescription? And you can just like, they create it on their end. The thing is that this idea that it needs to be more comfortable, more accessible, more intuitive, like those are the things that we're going to be heading towards. And that's the thing, is I don't want to keep just smashing on Zuckerberg, because his R&D is actually adding a lot to the industry. I mean, it really is. I mean, we should be very grateful that the only reason we've come this far along this quickly is because one of those big tech companies is willing to drop billions of dollars into like hardware development. So, I do want to have some perspective on that.
Yeah. And I think that, everyone isn't going to spend $2,000 plus on a headset, but I do think if you asked back, I don't know, 10 or 15 years ago, how long iPhone's been around, I don't know, 15 years now or something like that. If you ask people then, would people spend $1,500 on a phone? They would have
So
said,
You'd
that's
be
insane.
laughed.
There's no
You'd
way.
be laughed
There's
out of
no
the
way.
building.
There's no
Yeah.
way. But now people will put them on payment plans. They'll do anything they can. Like there's really nothing that they own that is more important than their phone. Like think about that. Like
Can I share a
their
little
car.
a funny anecdote about working with? I think it was on a job with Facebook at the time. It might have been Microsoft, but I went on a job where I had to have like my phone with me, and I had like the iPhone 5 or something when like the 8 or 9 was out at that point. And I didn't think anything of it because I'm like, no, I'll just run this into the ground, and when it's broken, I'll get a new one. But every single person who worked in the tech world had the latest version. Like you had to. It was a status symbol. And I honestly
because we
started
don't wear
feeling,
ties anymore. I had to have
but
something.
I started getting very embarrassed though, because I was getting shamed. I could tell they were judging me, and I was like, I don't care. But actually now I care because I know you're judging me.
Yeah.
But there's
I'm
something
still
very
like judging you a little bit from back then.
no, and you well, I'll tell you what the final draw for me is I had to actually use it to record videos and things. And I was like, this camera sucks. Like I got to upgrade for the cameras. But that is something to be said about like, it is almost like it is a status symbol. And definitely if you go to other countries, I mean, it was interesting going to India, how much the iPhones were huge. Like they were everywhere, but because it was considered like a status symbol, like the iPhone was cooler and you were like hipper if you had one. And it was totally, I mean, I was like, wow, I guess nothing changes. Like, and so technology, of course, acts the same way. So I do think, Bob, you're onto something with the class divide. Like, if those things are a great experience, if it's $2,000 for these headsets, they're going to be in demand for people who can afford it, and it's going to be a status symbol. It's like owning a Tesla, right?
I've heard this fascinating thing, this concept. I think it was VR Download. They were talking about this, and I just thought this was really an insight that never would have occurred to me. And they said that they thought that there were going to be two different types of users, VR and AR, but that mixed reality AR stuff, which is what the new Pro is going to come out with in next month, and then the Apple headset, that was going to appeal to more people in developed countries who had an experience where they'd be like, yes, I want to experience the world around me and do things, walk about and have my experience enhanced. But he said a lot of in developing countries where people live in these mega cities, or maybe they live very remotely, that the idea of enhancing is not as appealing as escaping. And I thought that was really like a very interesting insight, that we think about, all this, AR stuff, but
dude, visit Jakarta. Just swing by there once, and you'll realize, like, okay, I could understand, wanting to, be in a different world instead of like in this cramped little, apartment that I'm renting with 3 other people. Like, just the volume of people in those mega cities, the population there. I mean, we are getting into Ready Player One territory, but the idea is like, not everybody is lucky enough to live with a lot of like, in comfortable and abundant places. So this idea of escaping into your own kind of world, and truly, I was talking to Bob right before we started this. I'm creating one of my second world, I should say, in VRChat, and it's a project for this other podcast thing I do, but it's I'm creating a spaceship, right? Because this whole idea of the podcast to do is we're supposed to be on the spaceship having these conversations. And I'll tell you, like, it's a pure joy to be creating something that would never exist in the real world, right? Like, I'm not going to be able to build a spaceship anytime soon, especially one that actually goes into space. So this idea that I can have this fantasy place to go to is extremely appealing. And I could see that being like, say you're stressed out at work and you want to just, instead of just going playing a video game, I could see hanging out in these, fantastical places. I mean, I think that's extremely appealing to people to create their own reality around them.
Yeah. I think also that, I give Zuckerberg credit for understanding the social impact of this, but what I do worry for Meta, and I feel like they're making a big investment, they need to get a return on this, is that there may be a fundamental problem with the social aspect, in that you need a critical mass of people to use this. Like if you want to play games, that's one thing. There's a whole world that people are, in a certain age group, they'll just play games with other people and strangers and stuff, and that's kind of okay. But when you get to socializing in a broader age span, you don't always socialize with people you don't know. Like people go to parties and they know the person having the party, and that's the common thread. And
Mhm.
then everybody else there, you might not know anyone else there, but you all know the same person, and there's something that's filtered out who's at the party. And so it's usually very interesting. You meet other people that are new, but you all have a common thread. When you go, the one problem is when you go into some of these worlds like Decentralized or VRChat, just a random world, there's 6-year-old kids and there's adults, and it's just chaos. And I think that it has to get to the point where you can go, let's have a party and invite all your friends and know they all have headsets. And
Mhm.
know, like, I don't care if you have only sold 20 of these headsets and nobody ever bought the rest of them. If the 20 that you sold were the people that were my friends and we can get together, that's great. But the problem is Meta's strategy is more massive. And I think where Apple might actually be is Apple is going to put enough functionality in it that stands on its own without social. They're going to think about it as an entertainment. Like if you want to watch a movie on the Oculus, it's good, but it's not great. Whereas the Apple experience, guaranteed, is going to be phenomenal. Like
Mhm.
everybody has a 100-inch TV suddenly in their homes. Like that, just on that alone. Plus there's going to be FaceTime that people are like, oh, it's FaceTime, but you're in 3D. I get that. When you talk about like chats and worlds, you're like, I don't really get that. What are you talking about? But if you just say it's Facebook, it's FaceTime in 3D, where you can talk to somebody's in this space, I think people can understand that. So I think Apple has a chance that even though they may not sell tens of millions of these right away, they actually could have these pockets where a business buys 10 of them or something like that. So
I want to just go back to the article that we started this conversation off
Yeah.
with and mention and pull together two things you mentioned while we were talking. One is they always try to recreate what was working like in the real world on this new technology without trying to like thinking, oh, it has to be completely rethought and redefined. And one of the things that cracks me up is this idea that in like Decentraland, everybody's building these shopping malls. And I'm like,
yeah,
I didn't like going to shopping malls in the real world. Why would I want to have this like incredible opportunity to be in a virtual world that we can create anything we want? And you're going to create a shopping mall? Like that to me
Yeah.
is so frustrating. I'm like, think of something better, man. Like, don't just have products that I have to wander through virtually to look at. Like even an
Yeah.
artist gallery. It's like, can we rethink maybe a way like we're limited with physical space, right? And gravity in a lot of these spaces. So like we're untethered now. So let's reinvent it.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. The idea
Totally.
of virtual reality shopping malls is a pet peeve of mine. I'm just
Yeah.
never going to like it. Anyway.
That's the
Continue.
equivalent of in the 90s with web pages for magazines that you flip the pages.
That's what I'm saying. That's exactly the
You had to
one-to-one
click,
comparison.
with your mouse to make the page flip.
Yeah, can we think of a new way to like a new way of having like, so you want to sell me products, like find a new way to make me interested, right? Because if you even think about it, like so much of how sales happen now is like Instagram, right? But at least that's infinitely more interesting than like a physical
Yeah.
space you have to go in and you sell me products, right? Like there's
Yeah.
got to be a new way to invent this that you can commercialize. Anyway. All right, I think
Yeah.
that's it for me for my comments. Any last words before we wrap up this conversation?
Well, I think that, one of the things they talk about is fashion brands. I mean,
Mhm.
the brands, I will give them credit for jumping into this pretty aggressively, within the reasons of within the limitations of what they can do and protect their IP right now. And I think they all know this is going to be massive. Like, I don't think everybody gets this. They're like, it's going to be big, but the average business is more out of fear. They're like, well, do we need to be doing something in the metaverse? I think the fashion companies, they know that this is actually going to, they don't know exactly when, but they know it's
Mhm.
going to be massive and that they have to be a player. And I think I, I actually think it's the sneaker company, the sneaker buyers that are making them nervous, because a lot of them, if the sneakers world is billions of dollars and people buying and selling and collecting them, and it's become a fashion statement and a collecting. And I think a lot of fashion companies just didn't understand that. And I'm not sure I totally understand it either, but it's that just shows you that the rules can change. And so I think they're all a little bit concerned that the rules could change on them very quickly. And just an example, we think we're all in the digital world, so we're thinking, let's create digital clothing, and you've got your physical clothing, but you can create some digital clothing. And some of them will say you can buy an NFT digitally and get the actual clothing. But the things that the brands have to be worried about, the existing players, is not that. It's that somebody comes out with a digital fashion product and that becomes huge, and there is no physical equivalent. And then they start making the physical equivalent. So it starts digital and goes physical instead of the other way around. And that's, I think, where you're going to see happen. And again, I do think the technology is limited, but I still think, like, when I look at what's going on with VRChat, I think like there's a lot of imagination and creativity going into, like, and when they just put in the which is the new one, the dynamic bones or the Fizzbone?
Fizzbones is the new one.
Fizzbones. Okay. Yeah. Well, the Fizzbones, the fact that you can interact and touch something and have somebody's ear move and have interactions with things, that sort of reimagining that, you think about clothing, you might touch somebody's clothing, but you don't think about interacting with their clothing.
Mm-hmm.
But now here's an idea. It's like, well, you can interact with what somebody's wearing. I mean, and it can move and it can be floating and all these different things. And it does take processing power. It does take polygons. So you're seeing it first with the headsets. But I think, the only thing I will say after reading an article that getting me a little bit nervous is that when they say, like, people aren't going to suddenly buy a whole bunch of powerfully graphic card PCs and hook them up to wires, that isn't the right direction. It has to be wireless.
Yes.
And I look at Apple, and they've got something that they have a chip that can handle this processing power. They have such a powerful chip that runs on such low power. And even that, they're having trouble to get it from overheating, but they have the capability to make this work in a headset. The fact is, nobody else does.
Yeah.
Like, there's no chipset that I've heard of that can actually create what everybody's expectation is, which is to have this much more realistic thing. So I think Apple may have the game all to themselves for a few years. Which I actually don't like, because I want there to be some competition.
Yeah.
Because Apple is a little heavy-handed with some of their restrictions, but I don't know.
I just wanted to backpedal talking about the fashion. Like, right now, what is fashion? I mean, it really is form and function, because the clothing needs to do something. You don't make shoes that are incredibly uncomfortable. You go to a research and development. You're like, okay, this
No,
is how the
actually,
human foot is structured and stuff.
There's people that will buy very uncomfortable shoes.
That's true.
if they look good.
I mean, like,
I'm not one of them.
market, people are looking for something that's reasonably comfortable to strap to their feet. But in VR, comfort really isn't something that you need to worry about, because you're not actually wearing it. So you're going to see that, as far as like function is concerned, who cares? But the form, I mean, the sky's the limit. You could do anything with fashion. So I think that it's going to be great for the independent fashion designers who don't have tons and tons of money to just be able to design something in VR. It doesn't have to be comfortable. You don't have to do any research and development. It just looks cool. People like it because it looks cool. They can put it on their avatar. So I think that the barrier of entry is a lot smaller. So you're going to have a lot of people who they're not in the industry, but they can release stuff that instantly becomes viral. It goes viral. People are like, oh, look at this pair of shoes. This is amazing. But, it's made by somebody who has absolutely no experience designing clothing, but they have a lot of experience and a lot of imagination in making something that looks incredibly cool. So I think that is really the neatest thing about Web4, is that it's just going to allow people who don't normally have opportunities to release something to the mass market to be able to do so. So whereas you see like viral posts today, just imagine like viral clothing items in VR and stuff like that. I think it's kind of neat that people will be able to do that.
Well, and I think we're headed towards this nexus, because if you notice, like Peter and I have doing research in this for a while, there's so much incredible energy happening in the Web 3.0 NFT fashion space, right? So there's people creating these insane designs, but they're never really meant to go, or they're just unable to go on like an existing avatar right now. They're just not, it would take somebody to rig it up onto an existing avatar, right? So it's like there's that separation between this wonderful world of crazy fashion from people who are deep in the industry, especially young people, right? Then there's this other world of like VRChat and avatars where they're doing all this crazy cool stuff too, but it's almost like they haven't met in the middle yet. There's no technology available to take that incredible fashion design and just slap it onto an avatar. But we're so close. I feel like we're going to see that in the next year, right? Like somebody's going to perfect that, or at least do the first version of that, where you can just see that awesome avatar design or clothing design and put it on your avatar. That's where I think the energy is really going to heat up. And like what you're talking about, Bob, it'll be, like I said, it'll be like a new form of expression that is only going to be more valuable and more valued.
It's interesting, like Genies, I don't know exactly what Genies is up to, because they keep kind of coming out with their product and not coming out with their product and pulling it from the market. And then so I don't really, and it's mobile and I'm not sure, but I suspect that they're doing something with Apple, because they're one of their board members is also on the Apple board, from Bob Iger from Disney. And so I don't think that's an accident. And also that the Apple headset is the only headset that could handle the graphics that I think I see the pictures that they're using, that probably requires that kind of power. So it'll be interesting to see, but what their model is with people building avatars within their kind of closed ecosystem. But Ready Player Me, I think, has done an amazing job at getting so many platforms connected. But it is the lowest common denominator. And I do think, like your point, Lucas, these things haven't connected. And so for a while, they're going to be, I'm not sure that it's going to happen. There definitely is a processing power problem here. That's like a very real problem. I don't know if Meta is going to be able to get up to the level that it needs to.
I forget about that because I've been using my PC with VRChat. And if I just put it on like the regular Quest VRChat or whatever, I forget how quickly the quality drops. I can't even use any of my avatars. I have to create like scaled down versions. I haven't even done it because I'm like, what's the point?
It's a big thing, and I think so. We're going to have this diverging where I think people will start to be able to do some things on the Apple headset, but it's going to take a long time for them to sell an installed base. It's going to make there be a market for this stuff. So in some ways, I think the market is going to be massive, but it is a little bit going to be slow to get there, unless people decide to hook up graphic card powerful PCs to their headsets, which actually, to be honest with you, I actually think some people will do that, because I know it's something that we're doing, and I would never have done that if it wasn't really for you, Bob, getting us into that and go like really to understand how much better the experience is.
It really is.
Thanks for joining us on VRChit's Tech Talk Weekly. Next episode, we'll dive into the world of VR fashion. Hope to see you there.